Hi. I'm losing my voice. I will speak as loudly as I can. If you cannot hear me, feel free to yell and say, "Can't hear you." So, my goal is to tell you a little bit about myself, about philosophy and practice of our organization, and then have plenty of time to talk. I'm sure you're asking yourself, who the hell is Milenko? I do. But what right do I have to be up here? Most likely any of you could be here because you're doing important work. I've been trying to find out what is different about me from all of you. Well, for one thing, I do not work with universities. I work with communities. I'm more interested in the common denominators in life in communities. I grew up in what is now Slovenia, former Yugoslavia, in a city where sustainability was all there was, because you could not have materials and food flown from elsewhere. So when now my American friends tell me that we should focus on sustainability, I say, slow down, let's learn from what other cultures have done, because I've experienced it. Farmer markets, walkability, we didn't have cars. So things that we're trying to invent are in part stepping forward, but in part is remembering the best of the past. I lived in a wonderful city called Ljubljana that is just a marvel of an urban design, density galore. People live on top of each other, but that density is complemented generously with public spaces and parks and cafes and inns and pubs, you name it. The third places where people bump into each other. And when they do, studies show that after a while, you recognize a person just by looks. You don't need to know their name and who they are, and the trust factor increases. So, Dean, you and I chatted during the previous discussion. There are two deans here aligned. It's the dean alignment. But you know, if we bump again into each other 2 years from now, we will already start from a different level. And no love affair happens without first bumping into each other. It's just it's a wetland of community making. So I experienced that. I have it in my bones. What I also experienced was a society that was very politically and socially very dysfunctional. I don't know if any of you lived in socialist systems or communist systems before. I did. And it's not pleasant to live in a society where the least talented people have the most power, and the most talented people have the least power. And sometimes as I move from one community to another and from one state to another, I look for those vital signals. Who is visible? Because if the most creative people are invisible, that starts telling me something. In any case, I was a lousy student. I want to tell you, you would probably have hands full with me because I was rebellious. I didn't trust my teachers, I didn't trust my parents and their ambitions for me, because I felt that they were trying to guide me down the path where if I fulfilled their expectations of success, I would fail as a human being. It's a terrible predicament. Luckily, I found two avenues for solving this problem, and one was humor. Most Eastern Europeans have a really weird sense of humor. Because you laugh at this incredible gap that exists between our aspirations and our reality, and it's been driven into our bones over the years. But the other one is art, and in fact, my initial inspiration for work was a group called Dada. Have any of you ever heard of Dada? Well, they combine art and humor in a most wonderful way. They laugh at things, basically, and point out how ridiculous it all is. So I got vaccinated against that system early on. And two things happened later on. I became an artist, and I became quite well-known artist. I joined a collaborative of artists in Slovenia, a group called the HO, that we exhibited around the world by the time I was 22, 23. So in some ways, I entered a very successful artistic career, which I brought to an abrupt halt one day when I was exhibiting in a museum. I believe it was in Germany. And I walked outside of this white-walled room where everything was just so, onto the street where nothing was just so. Everything was wrong on the street. There was noise, and there was pollution, and there was anger. And I decided I need to do my art out there on the street. And so I stopped doing art and started to travel, try to understand what was going on in the world. Remember, I was a generation that experienced the 60s, and we rebelled against everything. So I had tons of questions. Eventually, in '86, I started this nonprofit on a very simple intuition that I was lucky to experience art as a creative cycle, kind of understood how a possibly great idea can travel on its journey to become a great reality, mini reality, but nonetheless real. And I decided to apply that in the life of community, that the studio in which I would do that work from now on would be community. Now, what I do after 26 years of this kind of work, and I'll show you one project only, which just got completed on Sunday, this last Sunday. That's in part why I'm so voiceless, hoarse. But what I do now is try to teach others with my colleagues at Pomegranate Center about what we've learned in this seat of the pants University of Pomegranate Center. We interact with lots of institutions. None of our projects happens in a vacuum. It's never a Pomegranate Center project. In San Diego, where I just returned from yesterday, we had 7 or 8 partners. And we work with governments and rarely with universities, though I do give talks at the University of Washington every now and then, and just been invited to be an affiliate professor for the design school there. But that's about the amount of my relationship with your world. Every now and then we get students to work as interns at our office. And once we had a class of students working with us on a project, and I'll tell you about that later on. But the foundation, I'll start with some ideas. The foundation is this. Henri Matisse was a great 20th century artist. Some people think that he was greater than Picasso, including himself. But I love this quote of his, that everything, now remember, this was written about 100 years ago. Everything that we see is distorted by acquired habits and a flood of ready-made images that are to the eye what prejudice is to the mind. And then he goes on to say, to see, and I added, to think without distortion takes courage. And I think we find ourselves in a very strange world right now. Most likely, our worlds were always strange. But I think right now we live in a very interesting moment when a pop culture fueled by instant transmission of images and information readily creates a consensus reality where we buy into things without questioning them. And I think it starts with this. It's what Matisse talks about, just stepping back, being free of prejudices, and start to work out something out of that freedom. And this has profound ramifications in our work with communities. And I'll show you in a moment how that works itself out. This is the first group of students in San Diego that we took through a 6-day or 7-day intensive program that we call Pomegranate Center Fellows. And they are beneficiaries of our experience. We want to share with them what we learned that is invisible in a project when volunteers work with us, so that they can lead their own projects in the future. So what do we tell them? I'll share some ideas with you. We tell them that the core idea of everything related to community work is a cycle of ownership. That all great ideas initially belong to 1 or 2 people. I have never seen a group meeting produce really great idea. It's usually produced by 1 or 2 or 3 people. And artists with whom we often do work feel that their responsibility is to take that idea themselves into reality. And that's an option. All of you have that possibility. I'll write my own novel. I do not have a temperament to work with other people. And besides, the idea of writing novels together is a terrible idea. Let me do it myself. And that's perfectly great. But if we go the community route, as I understand you want to do, then there is certain logic to this journey and certain set of questions and ideas that we have to deal with. Our answer is that we grow idea like an onion. You add another layer and another layer and another layer in such a way that people can enter this journey at different levels of expertise, but also of kind of core intelligence. How often community engagement translates instantly into long meetings in our minds. And if you're in Seattle, that's actually true. You know, but I'm always amazed. Tell me what community engagement means. It means long meetings where not much gets decided and then people are angry at each other. And meetings are usually manipulated or usurped by a handful of people who either have passion or anger or are naysayers or curmudgeons who hijack the entire procedure, and then everybody's frustrated and nothing good is done. I don't know if you experience that. I experience what we call the horsemen of community apocalypse everywhere. They are everywhere. And they have an incredible amount of power to hijack valid community initiatives. And they know it, and they do hijack it. That's part of their power. To diminish that possibility, we create a steering group of people. With their help, they are not decision makers. With their help, we assemble the community. In 1 or 2 meetings, the community makes a choice of how to proceed. In our methodology, you never meet with the community around an issue for more than 2 or 3 or 4 times. Because if you say it's going on forever, people are not at their best at the meetings. They will not give themselves to the process. And besides, the most talented will disappear. They'll get frustrated faster than the rest of us. So this is how we try to structure our work. That it starts with a small group, you assemble a steering group, you go to the community, you create an early success so the umbilical cord between ideas and reality is still maintained. The same group needs to work with us from beginning to end. Then you realize a project that must be followed by another project. So it's kind of a breaking down the large issue of society and everything that needs to be done into a small cycle of work that is defined by the ability of the same group of people to walk with that work from beginning to the end. And that end needs to be a new beginning. And when that is completed, amazing things are possible. So what we also talk about with our students is that we need to be really careful to know the difference between creativity and cleverness. The Germans have a proverb that says, "Too clever is stupid." And I like that. And when you think about it, how much of what we celebrate in our society right now is clever, but it's not improving the context, it's not improving the commons that makes our acts possible. I remember when I came to the United States, I read a story about square tomatoes. Do you remember square tomatoes, any of you? University, I think it was University of California, was hired to create, design, and create a mechanical tomato picker. It worked so well in every respect except that the metallic hands were too tough for ripe tomatoes. So there was this precious moment where instead of going another way, let's go plan B, maybe, somebody had a clever idea, let's redesign the tomato so it could be picked by our investment in this machine. And they did. But the tomatoes that were served for some time to all of you in this country for a window of time were square because they decided let's manufacture them square while we are doing all this. They were green and artificially reddened through chemical process. In a process, small farmers lost jobs because for some stupid reason this mechanical tomato picker became the norm of agribusiness. So, and they went. Small farmers were out of business. So only a handful of people won, but everybody else lost. And I thought it was a perfect metaphor for this kind of a cleverness. People, I'm sure, who designed this said, "How brilliant! Look at us, brilliant." But the difference is that creative act needs to enhance the context within which it resides. Whether that context is economy, or it's society, or it's a social fabric, or it's the environment. That's creativity. And it's slow cooking, and it's thoughtful, and it's always mindful of the terrain in which it occurs. Cleverness is fast, and it's smart, and it's hip, but it's not necessarily enhancing the environment. So remember that there is a difference, and it's good to know that difference. We tell also our students that there is a big difference between community of shared interest and community of place. For a newcomer, relative newcomer to this country, one of the great things about the United States is that people with whom I share physical space are so wonderfully different. When I grew up in Ljubljana in Slovenia, we pretty much looked the same and ate the same food and listened to the same kind of music. There were stratifications within that, but by and large, we were in the same kind of a cookie cutter. And now I go to my neighbor and he's not part of that cookie cutter process. He's entirely from somewhere else. And how wonderful that is. And I happen to believe that this emergence of communities of place is now inviting us to be really mindful in mining, in extracting the value of those differences rather than fearing them. And if we succeed with that, we will build great communities and will solve endless amount of problems. Because my neighbor who came from Mexico knows things that I forgot and my culture never taught me about, and your students may never bump against, because that's just how we are, and that's how universities are. But there is somebody with a source of knowledge sitting next to us, sharing the same bus, sharing the same street, sharing the same park, who may have the answer from their perspective. And unless we start unlocking those gifts, I think we'll be in a perpetual state of a kind of a virtual gated community where only people who are like me are allowed to be talked with, and I exchange ideas with them, but I'm not challenged by the difference. So, this is one of the few occasions in my life when I was interrupted by clapping in my talks. I thank you for that. So it's the other value of place is that projects are manageable. In this country, think about all the people who have given up on large issues and are just improving themselves. I can't tell you how often I find people. I will do my meditation, I will eat organic food, because I've given up on a system that it will ever do for me something. And they've given up, so they improve themselves individually. Or I see people on the far side of that, the right side of this seesaw, who tackle global issues, but with great frustration because they're so big and so enormous. And somewhere in between is this right scale of community of place, the neighborhood. So your campuses are all in those neighborhoods. I think it's an ideal opportunity to link up with those neighborhoods, break the psychological kind of a gate that exists between the campus and the neighborhood, and see what starts happening. I think it's a tremendous opportunity to do that now with universities, but for everyone else also. And neighborhoods are just the right scale to try something, do it well, and let it lead to a larger realization at a later cycle. If it's done right, what we've learned in our work, it will lead to something better and greater. If it's too ambitious and done poorly, it will lead to nothing but anxiety and fear and frustration. So scaling projects in a way that lead to success is really important. Everything, this is just repeating the initial thought, everything that is of value started as a heresy not too long ago. And it then journeys to become heritage, and we call it reality. And so I deal as a director of a nonprofit, often deal with grant makers. And they're all trying to convince me that I have to prove in advance what I'm going to do. And I say, look, I'm an artist. You don't tell an artist you can only use greens, blues, and a certain amount of brush, and then we'll evaluate the effectiveness of that strategy. And so I don't know how you deal with that, but I think tolerance for those new beginnings that intuitively fit right, feel right. This is the right direction. And it's not proven yet, but it is right nonetheless. And how often we demand advanced proofs and rob those early beginnings. So this phrase was coined by a friend of mine, a cultural historian, William Thompson, who talks about these long cycles in civilizations where you can trace the beginnings of something to a handful of people who then carefully farmed an insight to become later on just called the reality. It's what we have. But we do not pay enough attention to that initial phase of the journey. We want to squeeze everything into the summer and autumn of this cycle. It's like show me the fruit. Well, we need to grow the seedlings here, you know. So we are trying to create a situation where it's okay to have wild ideas, but it's also okay to try them out and push them out and see how they survive. In collaboration, at the end, we believe there should always be a multiple victory rather than a single one. That the time for creating something that benefits one thing but diminishes others is simply gone. So all these false discussions that we have in our society about what is, you know, if economy is more important than the environment, and for crying out loud, how long has that been going on now? And if we cannot come to a position that says it's both, and there is health, and there is education, and there is seniors and children, and there is equity, and there is arts, and there is history, all those things and many more are important. And if one goal diminishes the importance of the others, it is not a multiple victory. It's not sustainable. It must stop. So in small ways, we are all victims of this tension here. We all participate in something, and we maybe inadvertently diminish something else in the process. But paying attention to that is really important. How many of you are music lovers? Let me see. Well, I'll use musical metaphor. When you listen to good jazz, or sometimes ethnic music, or you listen to Bach's music, Johann Sebastian Bach, these are examples of what's called polyphonic music. And polyphonic music is a kind of music where, unlike our pop music, with which we're well acquainted now, where one melody carries the day, so to speak, and the orchestra and the chorus supports that one tune, in polyphonic music you would have 5, 6, 8 things happening, and each one is equally important. And the trick is to make them work together in such a way that they create something greater in the process. I have a good friend who is a very famous jazz musician, and he talks about how in good jazz, you want to make everybody look good. In bad jazz, you just take the center and show how great you are. And he says, good jazz is all about creating space where excellence can enter. And you want that excellence to come from everyone. What a great metaphor. And so I'm convinced then that we need to develop this kind of polyphonic mind, that we've been trained and encouraged since we've been young children to find that one tune and play it, and you'll succeed. You'll be a specialist. You will be wonderfully clever. But creativity, I think, has more to do with this ability to do that while listening to everyone else who happens to be around me with their weird and strange melodies, and then make sense of that. And we have great musical examples just of that kind of existence. And I think it has to do with an awareness of co-creativity, of you do great things, I do great things, together we do even greater things. Well, community is nothing but polyphony. It's not pretty, it's not prescribed, there are all odd voices that will happen, but if we pay attention to those odd voices, they will start sinking in because I will start changing myself in relationship to them. So collaboration is not about doing my stuff with other people at the same time and I stay unchanged in the process. It's about willingness to be changed by the differences of others. And that, I think, is a very, very demanding and courageous thing to do that is at the basis of community work. Make it beautiful, and small is powerful. So if you're ever tempted to solve global problems in the next 2 weeks, break it down. Make it small, make it successful. And I think artists truly believe that it's the quality of the work that counts rather than the ambition of the goal. That's why we have poets. They squeeze a whole world into one page. And painters take this three-dimensional reality and push it into 2 dimensions. It's all about shrinking, and that's a given. We'll all have shrinking canvas to work with, but doing it so well that the whole picture is still there somehow, that the spirit of the idea is still in that small act. That, to us who work with Pomegranate Center, has a lot of promise and power. So I'll show you now how that all translates in our work. This is a piece of land in San Diego. It's actually in National City. Are any folks here from that part of the world? Okay. Nobody. Oh, there are. San Diego. So this is in National City. When we started this project, this is what we found. A circular area that was left in this state for 20 years waiting for tot lot to happen that never happened. And we had a grant to train those fellows that you saw the picture of in such a way that they would have a classroom one day, and then we would do this project on the next day, and we will instantly check the theory with the practice. So this is that same space as of last Sunday. Today's Wednesday, so last Sunday we finished it. The first picture was taken in January. So that's how fast we work. When I talk about speed and small time and small resources, this is how we do it. January, April. What you see here is opening celebration that was attended by 200 people. When we started the process, the government of National City said, there's no way you can get more than 10 volunteers to work with you. There's no way, because we've tried so many things in our community and it doesn't work. People just don't want to come out. And we tell them the reason why they don't want to come out is because you have a meeting as the only form of your engagement. But if we build something, and maybe you'll find that in interactions with real communities, that there will be people who have intelligence for meetings and are really smart there and are smart to talk ideas. But they represent about 10% of community. About 40% of the community are people with shovels and chainsaws who say, let me know when you're ready to do something and I will come. And they come out. And then people who do not work to use physically, they prepare food and they play music. And we create this incredible festival of events. So here's how our projects look. It's called Butterfly Park because the community wanted more than anything else to attract back butterflies that used to inhabit this area before it was developed into this strange place that we found. There's a large stage that is 50 feet long that mimics the butterfly wing. There are benches made with concrete, and there are plants in those beds that are specifically planted to attract butterflies. Here's how it looks, our project. These are not artists, these are just people who learned on that day to carve and stain wood and ended up being this. This, by the way, was done, this particular project was built, some grading was done and concrete was done in advance, but everything else was done in 4 days. We started last Thursday. Worked Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, had that celebration on Sunday. The steps leading into the park have handmade tiles made by children in that community in advance, but placed into the stairs during that week. So as people visit the park, this is invisible, but when they exit, there they are. It's a wonderful parting gift. There was music. And so I hope you see that I love ideas. I love considering, thinking what is going on with our world right now and what is happening with our communities. But just as I'm absolutely committed to turn that into action. Having meetings about communities is one thing. Turning that into an action is an entirely different thing. And a whole new reality happens. So this project, probably by the end of everything, would have something like 2,500 hours of volunteer work channeled into it. Every person who was involved in it is an ununiformed police person who will take care of this place. We have one project we did in Walla Walla where we know that 911 calls were reduced by 40% and stayed there since we built a project there. And it's not because of the design and cleverness of all this. Design is important. But it is because people who lived around that place got to know each other in the process of making it happen. And for the first time talk to each other and work shoulder to shoulder. And when you do a project like this, you do not care whether you're a Republican or Democrat. You don't care what religion you are. There's just this project that we need to finish in 4 days. That's all there is. And everybody pitches in. And it's absolutely wonderful. So my parting words, and then I would like to have some conversation, is this. When you contemplate community engagement, resist vigorously. Resist the temptation to have a series of meetings. So have meetings, but then commit to push it out into action and do it right, do it beautifully, do it artistically, do it well. Do it on scale that is manageable for the time and resources you have. And something can be done. This project, the mayor worked with us for 4 days, and the opening speech, he said, for the city to do this, it would cost 5 times the amount of money to do this project, and 5 times the length of time in which we work. So this is very efficient. We can do a lot with little if we start collaborating, playing community jazz, which means that we need to develop our polyphonic minds so we can hear each other's melodies and adjust our own to the rhythm of everyone else. That's the infrastructure of community life. When that happens, wonderful things follow.